Hey guys, I'm here to talk to you about what is going to be on quiz one, how to review for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through three big ideas of quiz one. I'm going to walk through all three ideas with you. Then I'm going to show you the areas that we covered on the quiz itself through the quiz one review worksheet that I gave you at the end of class. So you can kind of go back through this video again if you want to and be able to copy down those parts. So big idea number one is the environment. The environment is covered heavily on quiz one, and there's just a couple of concepts that I want to talk about. So the first one is going to be maize. Maize is corn, and we know that this is going to heavily affect the settlements of the Mexican indigenous people by causing them to stay planted. So think about you plant corn, the Native American populations are going to stay planted themselves, no longer being nomadic and instead establishing permanent settlements. And that sets up this whole idea that the environment is going to influence settlements a lot, which we'll talk about in just a second. Next is the Columbian Exchange. It's the introduction of new environments towards one another. This is the exchange of goods, diseases from the Americas to Europe and from Europe to the Americas. A couple of big notable things is that a bunch of the vegetables that went from the Americas to Europe actually benefited Europe, giving them longer life expectancy. Europe brought over livestock such as horses, cows, pigs, but they also brought over, probably most notably, smallpox, a disease. And that is going to be the major killer for Native Americans. Over 90% of Native Americans were killed by this really terrible disease, smallpox. And it really destroyed a lot of their communities. That's probably one of the biggest environmental impacts of this time. A couple of more examples of settlements being influenced by their environment. You have Pueblos, Pueblo Native Americans. They lived in the southwestern part of the United States where it's really, really, really hot. So because of that, they built their houses into rock to try to cool them off. Whereas the Midwestern Native Americans, the Great Plains, they traveled to hunt the buffalo. And since they were hunting the buffalo, they needed a more mobile home. And their mobile home were teepees, very lightweight tents that could be set up and torn down very quickly. So both of these areas were influenced by their environment. And then for the colonies themselves, the British North American colonies, the environment is going to impact their economies. If you remember in the South, they are going to be all agricultural based. It's going to be very, very warm and hot there. And so because of that, they're going to grow lots of tobacco, and that's how they made all their money. In the Midwest, they did both. They were able to grow certain crops, not tobacco, but wheat and oats. Remember the Dutch Quaker oats. And they were able to also trade fur with Native Americans to kind of offset the fact that they didn't have a cash crop like tobacco. And then in the Northeast, because the soil was bad, and because it was so cold, they mainly had to exclusively trade. So their ports were really important. They had a lot of merchants. So again, that's another way that the environment is going to impact the economies. Finally, it's going to also impact slavery. For the North, they're not going to have slavery nearly as much. This wasn't necessarily a racial tolerance idea, the fact that they thought slavery was morally bad or good. It was because in the North, they didn't have a need for slave labor, whereas in the South, they did. They needed a group of people to be able to harvest this tobacco. And so slavery is going to become very popular in the South. And again, that deals with the environment. And we know that this big transition from indentured servitude to slavery is going to be kind of kickstarted by Bacon's Rebellion, which we'll talk more about in just 1 second. So that's big idea number one. For big idea number two, you need to get better at being able to look at documents like this and be able to kind of figure out what these documents are talking about. So what I'm going to do is I would love for you to hit pause, try to read through this document and pull out the main idea. And then once you press play, I'm going to go through and kind of cover the big idea. All right. Hopefully you press pause and you were able to go through, kind of figure out some of the big ideas here. What I'm going to do right now is kind of mark this up, kind of show you where the big ideas are. So first thing I do is I look down here and I look at who the author is. Don't know this author, but I do see that they are a historian. And I look at the title, Immigrants and Motives, Religion and Settlement of New England. So I can tell that this is going to be kind of about the motives for why maybe people are moving to New England. All right, and then I pick up, if I'm going to skim, I'm just going to skim really quickly. It says the New England settlers were more closely resembling the non-immigrating English population than other English colonists in the New World. All right, so I see Chesapeake right here. That's the southern colonies. All right. So look right here. It says the prospect of colonizing distant lands stirred imaginations of young people all over England, but most of these young adults made their way to the tobacco and sugar plantations of the South. So that's one big key takeaway we could take away right here is that young people, young male adults probably, are moving to the South to harvest tobacco. Nearly half of the sample of Virginia residents were between the ages of 20 and 29. So again, that kind of highlights that this is a very young group of people. All right. Whereas in contrast, only a quarter of New England settlers were that young. This is similar to the sex ratio. So in New England, it resembled that of New England's population. So it looks like women were scarce in the South, in the Chesapeake, but were abundant in the North. So I'm going to assume that those are the two main things that they're trying to take away, that in the South, it's really young, mainly men. And the North, it's going to be women, men pretty equal and not quite as skewed young. All right. If you're able to understand that idea, then you're able to understand that document, take away the big information from that document. We'll talk about why that's important in just a second. All right, big idea number 3, same thing. I would love for you to pause it, read it, try to figure out what it is that it's saying. Hopefully you paused. I'll go through, do the same thing. I'm going to mark it up. I read that this is the Virginia governor, Alexander Spotswood. So the governor, I should know, was established by the king, royal colony of Virginia. So they had the House of Burgess right here, which was a representative assembly. That was the government structure, but the top of that government structure was a governor placed by the king. So this governor who represents the king is addressing the House of Burgess. What do you think he's saying? The matter I shall recommend to you is providing more efficient or effective for security of your frontiers against Native American Indians. All right, so he's wanting to set up some type of effective frontier against Native American Indians. It looks like these guys carried off or killed at least 20. Have attempted by several ways to oppose those invasions. So it seems like he is against fighting the Native Americans. Looks like he's against this idea of this party of rangers because they keep killing Native American allies. Say that. So the main idea, it looks like, is this Virginia governor doesn't really like that Native Americans are being killed. And he's addressing this to the House of Burgess. Now, this should seem very similar to another event. What event would that be? Bacon's Rebellion. Remember, Nathaniel Bacon was a poor farmer who wanted to fight the Native Americans. And that, though, was not during this time. It was earlier. It was like 1676, I think, something like that. So this is after Bacon's Rebellion, but similar problems are still taking place. This securing the frontier, and that's the big idea right there. All right, so we've covered these 3 big ideas. How has that actually helped us with this quiz review that you have to do? I'll show you. If you look right here, everything that's highlighted in red is stuff that I have covered, either in class or just now. So if you feel like you can't answer this, go back through, listen to this video again, and try to figure out how this is all covered. I guess I didn't cover this part as much right here. So interactions with Native Americans. So the South is going to have pretty violent interactions with Native Americans. You can see that from the text. New England is also going to have violent interactions. Think King Philip's War, Pequot War. Middle colonies is different though. They have peaceful interactions with Native Americans. And one thing extra for you guys, for government institutions, you can just write none right here for middle colonies because we did not really cover any government institutions at the middle colonies. All right. Hopefully this helps. Good luck. Let me know if you have any problems.